We got a couple people joining here online, so I just don't want to start until I have folks. Morning, Crystal. Good morning, Crystal.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining. Someone joined by iPhone. It just says iPhone. Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, that's me, Ben Chadwell.
Oh,
Good to be here.
Good morning. Thanks for joining. So we'll get started. We have several folks here in the township building. So what we'll do for, this is for the 9 o'clock recap session from yesterday afternoon's initiation of the workshop. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kirsten Capitello. But I'm just going to start off with a brief presentation. I think several folks in the room have seen this. I think a couple folks on the line, but we want to make sure the new folks that haven't seen get at least a little bit of overview about the project. So just going to start right in. My name is Troy Truax with Michael Baker. Michael Baker is a consultant to Lower Island Township on the Gettysburg Road Corridor Master Plan. Kirsten Capitello is with Michael Baker, our urban design studio, and Peter Quintanilla, who just stepped out. He's doing a little bit of field work. He always likes to do field work, right, Brad? He's out taking a couple extra photos, but he'll be back in. For the most part today, Kirsten and Peter will be facilitating the design workshop. So what we wanted to do is just make sure everybody understood the background. This is the presentation that we gave yesterday. That's why it says Tuesday, not Wednesday. So what we covered in the initial session was about the master plan, about the corridor, some corridor visioning opportunities was what Kirsten will go over, kind of setting the stage, kind of getting the juices flowing for ideas. For our study purposes, the yellow alignment is actually Gettysburg Road corridor. It's comprised of two different state-owned roads. State Route 2016 is the number in 2014. It goes from the township line with Lemoyne Borough to the east. That segment between the township and borough line and about where 17th Street is that comes across the railroad bridge, the railroad overpass is State Route 2016, and the rest of the corridor has multiple different names. I'll show them to you, but it's State Route 2014, and that alignment continues past the township building, underneath US 15, and then out to Sharmanstown Borough, where St. John's Church and St. John's Road meets at the borough line or the township line with the borough. The yellow properties, if you will, that are highlighted, you can see the yellow shaded. Those are privately owned properties that we are using as subject properties to study as part of working on the project. We wanted to define those properties within the township because those are the properties that have frontage and have most impact in terms of any future land use or visioning in terms of what we would like to see the corridor be in 10, 20 years, if you will, in the future. And then you can see how the township is, and that corridor is bordered by those other municipalities, including Camp Hill, East Pennsboro Township, and Hampton Township. It's a 2.5-mile segment. These are the road names: Simpson Ferry, Gettysburg Road, State Road, and then Hummel Avenue. You can see the state routes that I referenced. So it's known by different names along the corridor, but we're using Gettysburg Road as kind of the name for the project. This project idea stemmed from the 2018 comprehensive plan that we also helped the township prepare at that time, and we wanted to make sure that there was an insight based upon surveys and feedback that we got from all the public work that we did, public outreach, the Citizens Committee, that this corridor needed some special study. Plus, also, we were trying to think about an area that actually germinated back in the comp plan that has now come to fruition, where the Township Industrial Development Authority has purchased the former Bonton property. There's a process of redeveloping that. We actually identified that as a potential project to think about where is the center of Lower Island Township. You really don't have a town center or anything that identifies you as being Lower Island Township. So that's one of the opportunities that Bonton project would think about, and then the corridor also helps think about, in terms of your gateways to and in and out of the township along this corridor. So we're going to be looking with this study, looking at land use, and that's what Kirsten and Peter will start to help facilitate. What are some of the ideas for future land use? and also to transportation. As we can see that we know the corridor, this is the Hummelstown or the Hummel Avenue side, if you will, up by the old was it White Hill? White Hill Cafe. This was like a little village. White Hill Village at one time. This is kind of the traditional older types of development that continues down the corridor through Lemoyne Borough. So the housing architecture there is reminiscent of what you would see further down into Lemoyne Borough. So this is kind of like the old, worker type of locations. They worked and walked to the factories, etc. And then further down the corridor, it's a 2-lane here. It's potentially walkable. The sidewalks need some improvements. So those are some of the things we already started talking about. If you go further down underneath 581, traveling west, you then go past the township building here at Carlisle Road, and it goes from a 2-lane to a 4-lane roadway. You can start to see as you travel and navigate it, it's a very much a different type of feel. Interesting. What we're looking at is after the U.S. route south to the Lower Allen Drive, traffic volumes from 2008 to 2012, that was a time period when the roadway was changed. The volumes dropped below 20,000, which is a good indicator for complete streets, kind of multi-use corridor because you have a lower volume. And that kind of is indicative of, do we have excess capacity in those 4 lanes in that center turn lane? Is there extra capacity there that we might think about having some type of other, like maybe a bicycle type of lane or something? So we're still trying to investigate that and see if that's a possibility. And then along those lines, multimodal, it is a multimodal corridor. You have a bicycle designated bicycle route J2. And you also, this is a CAT route for their fixed routes B and E. This is a snapshot of the zoning. So you have industrial, commercial, residential, and green. So you do have truly kind of a mixed use corridor in of itself, but you do have the industrial, which is kind of fixed. It's interesting on the Lemoyne side that kind of residential area is zoned industrial. So that's an area that we want to look at, plus in the other areas that we've already started to identify along the corridor, even with yesterday's discussion. Bike and walkability, that shows the sidewalk network, which we know is incomplete along the corridor. So we're thinking about walkability, bikeability. There's not a lot of amenities, so to speak, from that perspective along the corridor. So that's another thing that Peter and Kirsten will be trying. We got a lot of good discussion on that yesterday already, and hopefully today have more. We did some analysis on safety, crash statistics. So it's a heavily traveled corridor from this perspective. There's 100 between 2015 and 2019, 117 total crashes, 1 fatal, 3 serious, and 4 pedestrian-related crashes. The red spots are really kind of the main interchanges or the intersections along the corridor, and obviously those are circled because not just because they're intersections, but because the crash analysis tells us that's where most of those conflicts or those crashes occur. So it's just not identifying where those major intersections are, it's actually identifying at those major intersections. That's where you have significant crash. So those 117s, most of those occurred at those locations. And then obviously today for the workshop that we're walking through, building up to this, we also interviewed property owners along the corridor and got their inputs. We did one-on-one interviews with those property owners. We also have a survey. If you haven't taken that yet, we'd love for you to take the survey. But already we have, at least the other day, on Monday, I think, when we put this presentation together, 670 responses. So it just keeps on creeping up, which is phenomenal. That's a really tremendous response. And then real quick, I'm not gonna go through the details, but we have the survey findings. 72% are township residents, 12 work in the corridor, 63% visit the corridor daily or weekly, predominantly via driving, but 55 respondents walk the corridor, and there are a number of respondents that actually use the corridor for biking. I mean, we understand from the Harrisburg Bicycle Club, they use the corridor and bike the corridor because that is their mode of transportation to get to and from work, as one example. 13 transit users, so we know it's an active transit route, as we talked about. And then, majority of the respondents indicate they feel the corridor needs safety improvements for bicyclists and pedestrians. And then final slide before I turn to Kirsten. Generally, participants support aesthetic improvements. new uses to include restaurants, retail, parks, and recreation. We talked about those items yesterday as opportunities, and we talked about the third one, sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, lighting. That came up again yesterday in the conversation. Generally, participants of the survey, these are the respondents, do not support also the interview ease that we talked to. They don't support new industrial, office, or healthcare. I think possibly because they feel that those uses are already prevalent along the corridor, mostly industrial and maybe some office. They're not really supportive of new residential uses, and that might be a possibility because of it's viewed as heavily traveled, and those other uses may not be a good fit for residential. And removing traffic lanes or the blinking light, they do not support removing the blinking light out here. And I know we were talking about that yesterday. Of course, that's an emergency preemptive light that can let emergency vehicles, which we heard about a lot yesterday, right, Peter and Kirsten? Yeah. Heard sirens all over the place, and then traffic lanes. So that's one we're going to explore. What is the viability of actually, do we have excess capacity if we would remove a traffic lane? And hopefully through some of the visual illustrations that Peter and Kirsten will walk through, we'll start to get a better idea of what would that actually look like, or how could we accommodate, and where could we accommodate bicycle and pedestrian activity along the corridor. So with that, Kirsten, I'm going to turn it to you. And we have a full PowerPoint presentation, so the recording from yesterday, which we're still waiting to download, right, Peter? And we'll share the PowerPoint too. There's more information about the summary of the survey results. Go ahead, Kirsten.
Can you stop sharing?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, so what we did yesterday is we did a bit of a virtual tour so that those who are in the room and those who are online could all participate and follow along. As we started to look at some of these areas, because it is a large corridor, we wanted to go in and look at more of a human scale at some of these areas and what they feel like for a person on the street. So we actually had Peter out doing the duty of walking around and having to cross the street while everyone else got to stay comfortable in their chairs. But he did some video and kind of walked around a few different key areas along the corridor so that we could see what some of these areas look like for at a human scale, and really get into envisioning the dimensions that you have in the street, the dimensions that you have in the shoulder, the dimensions of some of the pedestrian spaces, and talk about some of the issues and where it felt dark and where it felt tight and where it felt exposed or unsafe. So what we can see here is an image of the entire corridor map with some of those labels removed. And we looked at 3 big areas. What you can see here and with those green circles, those are actually quarter-mile walking radiuses. That's roughly a 5-minute walk. And one of the things that came out of yesterday's discussions, we just started to think about where are some of the destinations and where are some of the nodes along the corridor, either now or potentially in the future. And what is the scale of this corridor? Where can you walk to within about a 5-minute walk? And we actually turn those off. We've got a few too many things on here. We started to think about one of the first areas we went to was down over by the underpass, and we looked at the traffic conditions there. We saw Peter try to cross the street while cars were whizzing by. And he successfully crossed, although we had some concern for him. But we certainly talked about, we saw a biker try to make their way by. They were going on the shoulder at that location. We looked at the condition of the shoulder and the sidewalk on the other side. Discussion were how dark it is under the underpass, thinking about making that more, including some lighting, some underlighting, other safety features. Also thought about the width of the street and how that could be repurposed. We measured the travel lane, and it was about 13 feet, which is wider than a travel lane needs to be, particularly for an in-town location and the speed that you have desired for the road through this area. So there's also an opportunity to think about narrowing those travel lanes, which could give a little bit of additional space on top of the space available in the shoulder, to think about how can all of that pavement be better utilized to accommodate the different modes of travel. So one of the things that we'll want to dive into more detail on today and work through visualizing with those of you here and those of you who are joining us on Zoom are where do we want sidewalks, where do we want bike paths, and what is the best format and design for those modes of movement. Do you need wider sidewalks? We can look at on-street bike paths. We can look at protected and separated bike paths. So we'll be going through and visualizing some different opportunities in that area. And then another item that came up a lot was a desire for street trees and more beautification along the street to make it more of a town, give it more of a town character. And then just really not just adding sidewalks along this corridor itself, but also into some of those side streets through the Bonton development to some of the retail uses in that area, and envisioning potential new development or new uses going into the theater site and the development site that's to the north as well. And then linking people all the way over to the school and the playing fields. There was an opportunity that was discussed that we'll want to get into a bit more today to use that green space next to the overpass as potentially a retention area and do some other stormwater management and landscaping through that area to make it both functional from a stormwater management standpoint, as well as more attractive, and potentially use that to also support more walkability and have paths go along that or through that feel more inviting and safer to pedestrians, and make it feel more, more like a contributing part of the corridor. And then one of the final topics we talked about in that area, and this will be an issue in each of the 3 sessions that we have today, is just overall identity and character. As you come into Lower Allen Township from either direction, when do you know that you've arrived? When do you know that you are in a place? When do you know that this is Lower Allen Township? And that was one of the areas that we discussed. You have an overpass, you have a visual area over the street, potentially as what's been done in some other communities is they use that overpass to include lighting and wayfinding and signage or murals or things that announce where you are and contribute to the character and the identity of the place. But also, all of the character along the street, the streetscaping or lighting, having a consistent streetscape in that area. We want to hear from you. Where do you see Lower Allen Township really announcing itself? Where do you want that gateway to the community to be? And what does this, what is the character and identity of the corridor that the community would like to see over the next 10 to 20 years? Do you want this to be the center, the heart or the core of the community? Do you want this to be your main thoroughfare through the community? Or are there other ideas or other visions for it? So that was the first area that we looked at. And then we had Peter walk up the street, and he came out to actually the area right outside where those of us in person are today, outside the township building. And he looked at the conditions on the street there, and we noticed that the buildings are very far back from the street. I'm going to actually bring up another image, and we'll show this one. So here's just a screenshot of one of the areas that he was doing his video tour yesterday. We looked at this, that he stood in this green area, and we noticed that right here where the street turns, you actually have views from both directions that terminate right on that little green. This is in front of the park space that's just next to the township building. And again, looking down the street from either direction as people are driving through Lower Allen Township, this is where the views terminate. And so this is a really ideal place to think about, again, really establishing what kind of character, what kind of identity do you want? Is this a good place to have some signage, some other features, some kind of wall or entrance sign or monument to Lower Allen Township, and then use that to draw people into and through the community. We looked here at, you can see, although we're looking down the street, you see very few buildings, partly because it's a screenshot and a fuzzy image, but also partly because the buildings on both sides are very far set back. You have a slip lane over on the left side, so those buildings, residences are set even further back from that. On the other side, you have a lot of commercial uses that are far back from the street. You have parking spaces in the front. There's very little that you see at this point, even though, again, people driving down from either direction, their eyes are kind of drawn to this point. There's very little that you see, and there are businesses on both sides of the street. So this is a place to think about drawing more eyes and bringing businesses closer to the street and bringing in more consistent businesses and improving the walkability so that you have a consistent and visible row of mixed use and of commercial uses that draw people to this area. So that's one of the things we talked about in this area. And that again, these are all very high level ideas, but we're going to get into these a bit more in detail today and work through what is it that the community sees as best. We also had talked here about determining, this is just a sample, but determining where are the best places to get people across the street. So we'll need to figure out where are the best places for those pedestrian crossings, for crosswalks, and are there ways, and what are the right kinds of landscaping to include along the corridor. There are utility lines overhead, which complicate where trees can go, but where we can put trees, fairly good to better on the overpass. There's quite a lot of space at that other end of town.
Are you sharing your screen, Kirsten?
I'm trying to share it again.
Oh.
I just hit, so it should come up in just a moment. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Can you get that up on the big screen?
1 second. You sharing?
I'm sharing it. While we try to get that screen back up again, I'll just describe it and then we'll show the image at the end as a reveal. We talked about how the oblique angles and the underpass, again, at that eastern end of the corridor, leaves a lot of available space that's underutilized, where traffic is poorly managed or guided, and there's a lot of additional extra pavement that is not necessarily needed, and simply by better guiding and directing where traffic can go, leaves us with a lot of available room to think about how we can better program it or use it for other modes, and some of the ideas that were even starting to be discussed for that underpass space itself, because there's quite a lot of space under there, and it is actually fairly open with views from all different sides. It's not too dark. There's opportunities to think about recreational spaces underneath. It's covered from the rain. There are other cities that have done this very successfully and had basketball fields or basketball courts or smaller games like table tennis.
Hey, I can't talk to you right now. I'm on a Zoom call. Bye.
Stop it and start it again.
Okay, and then just in time, I'll go and bring up the image of the and you can see, again, this was all just taking down our notes, so it has not been, we go into programming for all of these things, but we've just started to identify a lot of that available underutilized space, and then outline it in blue or color it in that browner color, and indicate all the space that can be reprogrammed. And can we think about what kinds of uses are desired on either side of that? Is this an area to think about having more commercial uses, or more mixed use, or more residential, or we want to hear from the community, you know, what kind of activity area do you see this being? But you can also see, you need to think about getting pedestrians across the street in safe spots, and then figuring out what are the best uses for all of this available space. That brings us just to about 9:30. Do we have any questions about our existing conditions, or the survey results, or?
If anybody on Zoom has questions, you could take yourself off mute or type it into the chat box.
Any questions before we dive into a more design-oriented session this morning? So our format for today will be, we have 3 sessions scheduled throughout the day, with breaks in between, because we know it's very hard to sit and listen and sit and watch on Zoom for the whole day. In each of those 3 design sessions, we will look at a different area, not too specifically bound. We'll see where the community wants to look at, but roughly the 3 areas that we looked at yesterday that I've just recapped this morning. We're going to start over on the western end of the corridor and look at the street near the highway, and going over towards the high school. So we'll be looking at that third or so of the site this morning and getting into some more detail. And then our second session of today will look more at the central area of the site and the area that's outside of the township building. And then our third session of today, we'll get back to this area that is up on the screen right now, the eastern end of the site, and look at that, roughly that third. So that's our schedule. That's how we're going to make our way through the corridor. And as we go, we'll want to keep in mind, you know, the connectivity all throughout, and the identity that's desired all throughout, and the land uses throughout. But what we were roughly hearing yesterday is there are different destinations and different uses in each of those 3 areas, and so we're going to look at each of those 3 in more detail. Do we have any questions?
No questions on, any questions from the Zoom audience?
All right, well, should we take a minute or 2 break, just to let people get up and grab anything that they need, and then we'll jump into the design session?
Yeah, what I'll do, I'll pull up, you have your screen showing Derek Kirsten, so maybe while people are just, a couple people just came into the meeting, maybe you can just
being recorded. I gotta.
So folks online, we're just going to switch gears, so just stand by that, so we can start our 9:30 session. Okay, for those on the Zoom, for those that just joined us, we want to make sure you have kind of an understanding of the corridor. Again, what Kirsten was referring to, those particular locations that we're going to get into a little bit more. The corridor lines is that yellow alignment. It runs from the Lemoyne Borough line west to the Sharmanstown Borough line. And then we're going to break the corridor down into sections. So just one second, I'm just going to flip to a map. We're going to look at the western portion, which is across, if you're familiar with where the Trinity High School is, the Sharmanstown Borough end, and where the Aldi AMC Theater that actually is in Hampton Township. Then further just beyond the 15 overpass of the corridor. And then we'll move and look at the central portion, which is where Hartsdale Drive all the way up to Carlisle Road. It's where the township building and park, little shopping center across from the township building. And then we're going to be looking also at the eastern portion, which would be just east of Carlisle Road, intersection with the corridor under the 581 overpass to the Lemoyne Borough lines. That gives you kind of the geography of the corridor and how we're going to tackle it today from an urban design approach. So, Kirsten, if they're ready, I'm going to turn it back to them. Sharing my screen and move it away.
Okay. Actually, what we're going to do this morning, we're going to do something slightly different than what we've done in the past. Let me just move the Mac. So what's basically happening, folks, by the way, is that people are able to see us here, so that's why I keep getting the Mac over to switch to so that they can see who's in the room here. But what I wanted to start with, actually, before we jump into the drawing session, is talking a little bit about what we have, the existing condition, only because I went there again today, and I did some more playing around there. So I just want to show a couple of things for us to talk about and think about. Where should I go? Where should I start? Where is it? Here it is. So I think everybody on Zoom can probably see my screen, right? But what I wanted to start talking about is I just went and I did a little bit more dimensioning, like Kirsten was saying, taking it out to the next step, which is dimensioning of this area specifically. And so one of the things that I will realize is that the shoulder here is about 12 feet, okay? Each travel lane is about 12 feet, okay? And then including the median, by the way, and of course, because it's easier that way, making everything 12 feet, then this little shoulder here is actually 6 feet, okay? And then the sidewalk here is just a simple 6 feet. And what's happening though is that this same width is actually carried all the way through, even here in front of the municipal building and the park, So what you're looking at here, it's actually, a 12-foot section per travel lane. So really the corridor does not change in character. It's still the same thing, all throughout. What is different, of course, is that here, now you're starting to have a lot more people closer up, a lot more traffic that's coming in and out, and that actually starts to create a lot more what they call confluences, issues, problem, But at the same time, it means that traffic is supposed to slow down a lot more, but it really doesn't, because there's nothing else that tells you otherwise, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that we learned from I forgot your name, John, right? John yesterday was that the old street actually used to go right through. Let me just make my pen slightly thicker here so you guys can see it. But the old street used to go right through here, and that's the reason why there is this piece of land here that it feels kind of awkward and left over. But so the reason why I want to bring it up is because later on we are going to talk about a little bit more about what to do with all this remnants of little spaces. But do keep in mind that if that's the case, then it feels to me like the right of way is probably somewhere where I'm drawing the black line there. And so a lot of these pieces here are actually little pieces that are kind of like no man's land at the moment. So, we talked a little bit about what we can do with this space here. We'll talk about that later on. But just to keep that in mind, that in general, the corridor actually is even though it's like 3 different pieces, and of course the third one all the way on the east side, it's completely different in that it's like a lot more narrower. It is also the travel lanes are still 12-foot travel lane spacing, I believe. But the only thing that changes here is that now we only have 2 travel lanes in each direction and 1 suicide lane in a way, right? And what is interesting, of course, is that we do also have more spacing there that we could play around with. So I think what we wanted to do now, and I just wanted to show that real quickly. Oh, and then I went out there and I flew the drone real quickly, and I got something more updated. And this is actually what it looks like. And I was waiting for a bicyclist to pass by like we did yesterday, but nobody ventured this morning. So sorry, Troy. I tried looking for him, I couldn't find him. So, but anyway, so we'll use a lot of these imageries to start thinking about what are the ways that we can do to incentivize more pedestrians connections and people walking and bicycling through. So, Kirsten, I'm going to switch back to you so that you can share your screen, and that way we can start talking a little bit about like the whole western portion. I mean, I know that we've been focusing on 3 specific points, but obviously there's a bigger piece that's happening on the west side, including grocery and entertainment that we hope to connect out everybody together from, right? Yeah.
Right, so this is the area that we were looking at yesterday and that Peter was just talking about this morning. And we'd like to start hearing from all of you what some of the ideas are for what you see in terms of the corridors land uses as it grows over the next 10 to 20 years, and what do you see? What would you like to see in this area? How do you see this growing with and better supporting the Lower Allen Township area?
Do you think it would be helpful to probably use the other one, the map?
Go back to the map.
Yeah, let's go back to the map and have that bigger conversation. So we understand what's there, and then we understand also what is it that what we are projecting to happen in the future, and then we start thinking about how to make that connection. Yeah, so there we go. Because I know that there's a hotel already coming in, right? And that's the one that where is it? I think that's over here somewhere.
And can we also highlight where the PennDOT right away is around that former interchange? Because that is kind of, you're identifying that one spot there.
Yeah.
The hotel site is the parking field. I think the Bonton building is still on there, which has been demolished. So if you go northwest, that parking field is the hotel site. There's a Burger King on the corner. There's a Texas Roadhouse in the lower quadrant.
Is this portion here?
May I?
The other northwest. Yeah, you want to use the pen or? You can just go out right there.
Okay, so this is the hotel site here. So that's the Texas Roadhouse, the Burger King, Bonefish Grill. So that's the redevelopment site the Township Development Authority is working on. And Gish's Furniture is right here. They're putting an addition on the back, and that's pretty much the limit of the township. They've got lines a little bit off. But this center in Hampton Township, it's got the movie theaters. I mean, that's ripe for redevelopment, unless movies make a comeback. But so we expect redevelopment in Hampton to occur across from the Trinity campus and so forth.
And the movie theater, it's actually quite interesting, right? Because nowadays you could really get 4K high resolution with Dolby Atmos sound in your house, and popcorn's a lot cheaper. So it's interesting what's going to happen to movie theaters. So we'll see what happens there. But so what we're seeing here is the type of development that happens along the freeway, which hotels that like the visibility, right? A lot of these big shops, they like the visibility. What's happening, however, is that it's also kind of like the conventional type of development. You have to build a building and then they put the building all the way in the back and they have the parking in the front, So, but that in a way is actually creating like a small little node. And then we also have exactly like Kirsten is drawing there, which is that other future node where the currently with the movie theater is at. Some of those buildings, by the way, their lifespan is about 30 years, right? So after 30 years, because of the type, they're tilt-up buildings and the construction, all stuff. After 30 years, they tend to want to renovate them and change them and all that good stuff. At the same time, that also means that I don't know how old this thing is. It looks like a 1970s maybe? No? I don't know if you guys know. But it's not?
Movie
Oh.
theaters new, but that strip center had a discount department store in it, in the probably late sixties and early seventies.
Okay. Okay, so the building itself could probably have been there.
Theater building, I believe, was a total redo.
Okay,
The Aldi store was just renovated and enlarged, so there's some things going on there now.
right.
Do
So-
you think out parcel development would be an option? We talked to Hampton Township and there's a lot of excess parking there.
There's a large parking field that's never used. There's a restaurant in ironically, the Lower Allen Diner, which used to be called the Camp Hill Diner, which is in neither Camp Hill or Lower Allen. It's in Hampton Township, but it's a Camp Hill postal address. So, yeah, between the diner and the main entry there at Lower Allen Drive, there's a lot of space along Simpson Ferry Road that could be developed for pad sites or other uses.
You want to zoom into that area, Kirsten, a little bit more, so, yeah. Yeah, and well, and what you see here, just looking at this aerial, which probably obviously is outdated, but what you see here is, first of all, you have a 5-lane road, right? And then aside from that, and we can't really measure here, we could probably eyeball it, but aside from that, the closest building actually is probably going to be this massive furniture building right at the tip end of that little triangle. That's like the closest building to the road. So that's not a very pedestrian scale area. So how do we change that into more of a hub?
And at the northeast quadrant of that intersection of Lower Allen Drive and that shopping center, there's a restaurant that I believe is currently defunct, but it sits way down in, it's a super elevated highway, so that lot that you really just see the roof and part of the wall of that restaurant.
Is it
right
this one here?
Right there, yeah. And then there's a building supply place in between the township boundary at the furniture store and those uses.
Yeah, and so you see, actually, this is the reason why we like to do a lot of 3 dimensions and also photographs, because some of those things are missed when you're looking at it from a plan view, right? I'm sure that whoever, the architect probably designed that building, thinking that it was at grade rather than thinking about, the different height elevation and how to make it visible from the street, at least with the signage. But so those are some of the things that we need to consider is how to take advantage of that in a way. Obviously, the one way that you take advantage of that is actually slowing down traffic, because the faster the cars go, the more time they have to be looking at the road versus looking at the side, and lights and everything else. So let's help out with that.
We could actually fit that entire, just thinking about the scale of the street and the amount of setback that you have here. You can envision, both of those buildings almost fit in the space in front of them. You could fit an entire other building of that size in front of each of those buildings on that street. So just an interesting thing to think about, the amount of space that is separating buildings and the amount of space that pedestrians would have to walk if we were to want this to be a more walkable environment and encourage people to cross that street.
Yeah. Is there somebody in Zoom that had comments?
Yeah, I have a question. Is part of this exercise going to be the township adjusting their parking requirements and setback requirements? Because a lot of times that's what sets essentially where the building footprint can be.
Yes, I believe
so.
So
Is Lower Allen Township going to be amending their zoning code?
Yeah, there is an interest on the township to want, as the next step, take this information to use it to help update or rewrite its zoning.
We also have an overlay district that's available there called neighborhood redevelopment, which has never been used by anyone. We wrote that maybe a decade or so ago, along with traditional neighborhood development and open space development. We have a neighborhood redevelopment overlay district, which would be more flexible on design, and it might need to be tweaked, but no one's ever used it. So I think that the township would be open-minded to either tweak the overlay district, or it probably wouldn't change the underlying district regulations for setback and parking possibly, but I think the overlay would be available.
John, you think that would provide the flexibility needed to
to, have waivers on the parking or?
Yes, and if we find that it doesn't, I'm sure that the commissioners and staff would take public input and consider changing the underlying or the overlay districts.
Yeah.
Because you have to have a larger tract to apply the overlay. So maybe the underlying district should be tweaked a little bit too, but that would be considered.
Right, good. Yeah, good to know. And the other thing, of course, is kind of like what we talked about yesterday, is that sometimes, planners, we come up with all these great ideas and we write it down as a regulation and think that people are gonna take that or take us on. But the reality is that the built environment doesn't really lend itself. So what is the street gonna be like? And does the street actually facilitate, mixed use, neighborhood, traditional neighborhood design when the street is so wide and nobody's gonna wanna walk there? So that's where the two of them have to coincide.
And could you maybe spend a little time talking about what we spoke yesterday at the meeting about, which is the need for some attainable housing in that area? And because again, malls are morphing. That mall is, I think, a very good performer with almost no vacant space.
Oh, wow.
It's an anomaly
Yeah.
for malls. But even so, it's got a Macy's and a Penny's, and department stores are kind of dinosaurs. So if they don't morph into a new customer service mode and keep acting as a department store, there's going to be a lot of square footage available for entertainment and other uses.
Yeah.
Could you just pause for a second? The person who asked the question, could you just see if that satisfied her
Yes.
question?
Did we satisfy? Who was the person that just asked the question? Oh, Julie. Okay,
I guess that
Julie,
was
do you
me.
have any other?
I think you answered my question about the parking, and that's part of this process. So I think that's good.
Yeah, I think at this point we are kind of like poking at everything, trying to figure out, what we're actually doing is going backwards, which is actually the way things used to be done before, which is like kind of figure out what you want and then write the regulations to actually get you to what you want versus write the regulation and hope that it gets you to something, right? So that's what we're poking at, all the different things. The conversation of the mall is a really interesting one. And can I just tell you that I work a lot. I've actually done maybe 6 or 7 different malls retrofits because the malls are dying indeed, and in California, out of all places, and that's where I lived before coming here, there are tons of malls that are going defunct basically. And what they're doing is they're slowly actually becoming more of what you guys are trying to do here, which is more of a little town center, more of a neighborhood center. So I think the idea that we have here of trying to position all this land for redevelopment into more of a neighborhood town center-ish, right? It's actually great because the mall will eventually go that direction too. And affordable housing is a different conversation because that's also a lot of tweaking of the regulations, a number of units and density and blah, blah, blah. But the reality, the fact is that you could really put affordable housing in different places. And if you mix it with market rate, then they no longer look horrible and like nuclear wasteland. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Not subsidized housing, but workforce, lower moderate range incomes of people that are
Working in retail, they're working in fast food and restaurant uses, warehousing, because there's that big Foot Locker, Kinney shoe warehouse in Hampton right at St. John's and Simpsons Ferry. There's a lot of industrial space just north in Hampton Township on St. John's Road. That's a big industrial center. So there are like moderate and low moderate paying jobs. A lot of the workers have a difficult time if they're working a late shift at the mall or a restaurant. If they're relying on public transportation, the CAT bus system isn't up to par with their needs. Yeah. So if they're going to walk or bike, it'd be better if they live closer. And we don't have a lot of housing choices. And we're looking at maybe that's part of the redevelopment.
And are you looking specifically at that old mall area for those kinds of uses, or just throughout along the entire corridor where it makes most sense?
A 1920s vintage neighborhood just west of the mall that was bisected by Route 15 back in the day when they didn't care about ruining neighborhoods with building US routes and interstates. And there are a couple of office buildings right on the northwest quadrant of Lower Allen Drive and US 15 that are an older vintage, they're not Class A office buildings, that there's two multi-story buildings that would be right for, conversion. If office space is, fading away right now, then I would say Class B office space is less desirable. That might be a target also.
Yeah. And, the converting of office buildings, we talked a little bit about that yesterday, right? The conversion of office buildings sometimes is kind of tricky because buildings tend to be like very deep. For offices, they tend to be very big footprint, which means that for apartments, they are a problem because normally you want the best spacing for a double loaded, single hallway apartment building is 60 feet. But the minute you go with 80, you can still pull it off. But once you hit 100, it's really difficult because no apartment wants to be, 45 feet deep. Because at that point, all the way on the inside, you get very little, natural light from the outside. So sometimes buildings you're able to do that. Sometimes it's more difficult.
Thoughts over here, and if you want to share some of your ideas.
Yeah, so, here's a rough piece of it. Where you have the defunct restaurant there, where you say future, basically you can put an L-shaped building on there. Create the Lower Allen Drive, Gettysburg, sort of a village center concept there.
I'm gonna put your sketch up on the screen.
Yeah, that's rough. So where there was what was it, the fire ice or whatever, the old fusion fire fusion on the northeast quadrant there, put an L-shaped building. Again, it could be mixed use, commercial, residential. Same on the left-hand side. Because of the grade separation, you could actually put commercial on the upper side, on the low grade side, but on the north side with the parking, and I'd even do some residential above. Same thing this morning when I came past the old Harris TV, that commercial building. It's a one-story, a lot of vacancies in there right now. That could be removed, brought to the street front across from the hotel. Again, it could be commercial first floor and residential above. So you're creating some opportunity for that residential density that would help sustain the businesses in that geographic center.
Yeah, so I think Kirsten's gonna do a quick sketch of that idea because that's exactly what we wanna start talking about. And what is interesting about doing that style of design, like Larry, right? Jamie, sorry. By the way, I'm horrible with names, so even my wife knows that, which is great. But no problem, Fred. The nice thing about creating that type of development where you actually push the building toward the edge is that then you start to create a street condition where the sidewalk could be nice and wide. Ground floor could be commercial, and then you have retail above. But within the sidewalk that is nice and wide, it could lend itself to a number of things, from like bus stops to bike parking to outdoor dining, which now, of course, is because I think it really was going to stick with us. But then it allows you to actually deal with the topography changes in the inside of the block, and so you always have a really nice frontage on the street level that allows for more of a interesting walkable. Are there any questions in Zoom, by the way? Okay, excellent. So Kirsten is just drawing out basically what we were just talking about. And what you see there is, the hotel, which is the location of the hotel, and we may not get the footprint exact, but it's just the idea, right? And we're hoping that the hotel comes up to the street. Okay.
There is a drive aisle and parking field, but it's apparently most of the parking is interior.
Into the back. Okay. Okay, great. So yeah, but what she's drawing there is what you see is changing, having more buildings coming up close to the street. And the other thing that she's drawing there, which is actually an interesting phenomenon, is have you noticed how when people go into tunnels, they automatically slow down? And the reason is because the perception changes from being a very wide area to being a narrow area. And so drivers automatically, they, well, the safe drivers, they want to slow down automatically because they know they're entering into a space that is tighter, So having tall buildings, actually 3 stories and more, no more than 5 stories, it's actually a really good sweet spot that they have found that is really good for people on the 5th floor looking down into the street and be able to see that Fred is walking down there and they need to like buzz him in. So 5 stories is actually really good, but then also having the street that are not too wide, so the cars slow down. But having tall buildings does help quite a lot. So that's what she's sketching there, the idea of bringing more tighter buildings there. But you can see what happens on the middle of the block is that you end up having a big space for parking, whether if it's surface parking or if it's structured parking. At that point, you could create some sort of a bid that does build a parking structure for everybody in that block, and then the savings, there's a huge amount of savings for everyone.
John, what do you think?
A furniture and craft store and a restaurant supply store will have to be displaced. I don't know how soon they'd be willing to develop, but they seem to be stable businesses right now. But I like the idea of the V-shaped building at the split of Gettysburg Road and Simpson Ferry. It gives you the visual that you are cutting into 2 different directions.
Right. I guess the big question, John, we thought about that too, is how much synergy, and Jamie, you're in real estate with professionally, but also the county. How much do we think that the redevelopment of the Bonton site's going to start to generate new investment and turnover? Do we have any?
Hope is that it will be a stimulus for development in that whole general Capital City Mall, Hampton Strip Center area.
I guess the line of thought here, some of the older uses, strip centers that, that there would be maybe 5-10 years down the road, or maybe 20 years, it would be, but I think that's what we're trying to think about. What do we think the horizon is for this turnover?
I would think that the little strip center that Jamie was mentioning that has the defunct Harris TV and appliance in it and the bank on the corner, if I were a developer, that would be right on my list to, because right across from the hotel and the township redevelopment site and near the mall. And that's the highway access is exceptional because the Capital City Mall used to put up a billboard at Christmas time telling people how to get there, because you had to either get there at Slate Hill Road or the old Highland Park interchange. Now how do you get to the mall? Lower Elm Drive interchange, boom. That's why you mentioned yesterday the traffic on this segment of Gettysburg Road and Hartsdale Drive has dropped.
Right.
People aren't going, they're coming to Walmart and those stores from Lower Elm Drive, not from here.
Right.
Can I ask a quick question about that?
Please.
This is Larry. I'm a township resident. I work for Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, but I'm asking this primarily as a township resident since I'm not one of the planners at Tri-County. I'm the communications guy. But do you remember the old ramps from a long time ago that were taken out from 15 that used to go down to Gettysburg Road? Is there any talk about bringing those back? You remember the old ramps that I'm talking about? The more direct ramp from, like, if you were coming southbound on 15, it came down and curved around to Gettysburg Road, and then there was one, to go directly from Gettysburg Road to northbound 15.
They were too close to the 15-581 interchange, and there were suicide merges, and there were a number of fatalities. So I believe that's why they got rid of it and did the current configuration. You have one cloverleaf, old-fashioned cloverleaf, a very short distance from another. So that's why it was changed. And I know it's really inconvenient out of habit. If I'm get on Route 15, I was used to get from the office here, you just go up a couple blocks and you could get on either direction. You now have to go up to Lower Allen Drive and backtrack to get on. It's a little weird, but I understand. The problem was you had those two old-fashioned cloverleafs of 581-15 and 15 Highland Park too close together, and it was nasty.
Did that answer your question,
Yes, it does. Thank you very
Barry?
much.
Okay. Yeah, great. One thing I just asked Kirsten to do, by the way, and if you notice, she's working on, Kirsten, you want to zoom into that area that you're working on right now? So when I was standing on 15, not 15, on what's that on the street?
Gettysburg, Susan Perry?
Thank you. Yeah, Gettysburg, right? When I was standing on Gettysburg, I noticed that there were a lot of cars coming in from the west, and they would do this turn, and I actually thought that they were getting off the highway, because they were doing it super fast. And the reason is because that other geometry that was there before is actually for getting off of a highway. It's a fast speed geometry type, big curves for trucks and cars and everything else. But really, this is supposed to be more of a neighborhood type of road, right? Do you want cars to actually slow down and stop there and making a right turn rather than what's happening right now? So I just asked her, and this is something for discussion, I just asked her to actually make that into a proper T, creating that little area there as, again, either A, more wetlands for water retention, or B, it could also be a site for development of some sort, or it could be just a park, right? But that right there, and it's not until like right now that I saw the area that I realized that it's super fast for absolutely no reason.
I responded to Larry's question too on chat. Not at this time. The ramps are not dependent on the long range plan.
Okay.
There's actually stormwater management facilities that PennDOT installed because they now expand or highways, but the water from the Bonton redevelopment site used to go toward Low Round Drive, and that retention area was taken away. So it also goes into that area along Route 15. So there's a major stormwater management area in there, and then there's surplus right of way from the old Cloverleaf is toward the Gettysburg Road curve there.
Okay.
So there is a major use already there that really can't change because of highway and Bonton site stormwater management.
Okay, so that area that we're coming up with, that's basically has to stay as a park.
It's possible that some of the surplus land in front of Bonefish Grill or the craft store and the furniture store can possibly be added to the Bonton site.
Right. Okay.
It's only about an acre.
Okay, so that's not very much.
I run in that area a lot, and so it's a very dangerous area, and I think I'm going to get killed.
Yeah, no, I was actually standing, like I said, I was standing on the other side where Kirsten's drawing the water area, and I was taking pictures and flying the drone and everything else. And I was like, my God, these guys are like coming out of the highway, and they're coming out super fast, but it's actually not an exit of the highway, it's just a road. Yeah. Yeah. That's why the T intersections are actually some of the safest. I know that it means that cars have to stop, but it's actually the safest if you want to increase pedestrian connectivity and bicycle ridership.
I just want to point out, I know these drawings were looking really big scale, and to make sure that they're visible from afar for everyone, these are all very accentuated and exaggerated. But just to get us into a sense of scale here, that little red building is an existing business across the street that I traced it and put it over across the street. If we were to do something like this and straighten out that intersection, even if we are not touching any of the PennDOT right of way, just the additional parcel that's made available by realigning that intersection and making a more direct, a more traditional T intersection, it's a pretty sizable amount of space that's opened up. And you can see that a perfectly normal sized business fits in there pretty easily. So just to keep us thinking of scale.
Are you saying that you would align that spur of Gettysburg Road away from the signalized intersection that's there now? Because there's a traffic signal to get you onto Linda Lane, which is that cul-de-sac spur
Up
to the north.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Kirsten, can you just redraw it so that it actually aligns with that? Straight on. That's part, yeah. That's that you brought up. Yeah.
An engineer can tell you what it's like dealing with PennDOT, but the township is the permittee to the signal, even though it's on a PennDOT road.
Right. Yeah, no, we deal with PennDOT all the time. We work for them all too, so. Yeah, okay, yeah, I see what you
That's
mean.
why it's
That's
there.
okay. I mean, I think the problem it's actually that other little arm that, you know, the turn to the right, you know, so, and you can see there, and what Kirsten was talking about is that auto sales building up onto the top right corner of the screen, you know, that's a 2-story plus house, you know, that used to be a house. But that's a pretty good sized house, but you could almost get that house and actually plop it here, which means that you could actually have something small that could be part of the park.
Now,
Not
the
as a
excess
business.
PennDOT right of way from the old Cloverleaf that's between the furniture and craft store and that existing road.
Mhm.
All the sanitary sewage from the new Bonton site is being re-engineered and it goes through there. So
Okay.
you can't build on it. And it goes to the Linda Lane pump station, which is at the northwest quadrant of Linda Lane and Cincinnati there.
Okay, okay, good.
So there's infrastructure in the ground there. There's a lot of infrastructure in the ground there.
Okay,
So that point could be landscape, but it really can't have a building on it.
okay.
So
The white there where Christian's roof is one of the Bonefish Grill, is that still in play in terms of, that's still in by PennDOT, right?
correct, but as I said, the land in that excess right of way that's closer to the Bonefish Grill and Hotel might lend itself to a building site, but I don't know that right down there. Right.
Okay, that's fine. And you know, stormwater, and in a lot of places, stormwater actually could be like designed really well. Could be like a beautiful park, you know, with lots of water feature and also interpretive signage that talk about the different type of landscaping and blah blah blah. I'm not a landscape guy, so I have no idea, but I know that's what they do, you know. So it could be a really nice, meaningful park. So that could be part of that area. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
The PennDOT detention pond is pretty much a trash dump right now, as far as litter.
Yeah.
It collects litter.
Right.
Hi, I'm Ben Chadwell on Zoom. I just want to jump in on this topic.
Hi, Ben.
So I'm a I'm a township resident as well, and I now work in ecological landscape design. And I want to echo what has been said, that a lot of times these water retention areas are really hands off. They're like fenced off, isolated. They're not really used for anything except for, you know, the bare minimum of absorbing runoff from streets and roads. So there's a lot of missed opportunity there. And I think, you know, the township has been considering more and more what it means to future-proof and ensure the integrity of the stormwater system with the imposing the stormwater fee, which I think is great. And there's so much in the areas we're talking about, there's so much impervious surface. And there's, you know, water is the limiting factor in many ways to landscapes, to buildings, et cetera. So I do think like anything that we vision here or strategize on, we should build in stormwater strategy to that and water management, but also like make it stack those functions and make it more than just what's required to deal with stormwater in Pennsylvania. Because it will end up being a really, really, as you know, a costly problem down the road if we don't address it now. And the other, I mean, I would think that because of the fee, there would be a nice financial incentive for businesses, investors, et cetera, to chip in and pay for some of those improvements because they're going to save in the long term. But I really like what has been done at the Lower Island Township building with that mini riparian buffer. It's kind of a demonstration space. There's rain gardens there, and it's beautiful. And it's just a really nice example of what can be done. And you know, if the township building is trying to be an embodiment of the idea, the identity of Lower Island Township, I think that's a great start. And what we do beyond that can kind of reflect what has been done at the building.
I can just chime in for what Ben is talking
Yeah.
about. Those are great ideas, Ben. This is Troy from Michael Baker. We've already talked to Rebecca Davis, who's the Township Stormwater Program Manager. So some of those areas.
Yeah, I've met her, yeah.
So we're already trying to figure out if there's an opportunity to talk to PennDOT. We work with their central office folks that deal with stormwater, so we're just trying to see if there's, even though that's PennDOT right away, is there an opportunity to make some improvements there so they're even more functional BMP type of stormwater features that are also more attractive, if you will, instead of just being kind of a barren space is probably the best way to put it. So those are great comments.
Yeah, like invite people into the space.
Township-
Oh, I forget.
Township needs
Yeah,
new projects, new MS4 projects, as we understand. So that's a potential, maybe a partnering opportunity. So we're gonna further investigate that.
Great. Yeah, there should be a lot of, I know there's a lot of grant money available for this kind of thing now. We were wrapping up installing a 6,000 tree riparian buffer in York, and a lot of it is paid by state grant.
Wow.
And so that can, you know, that covers a lot of the bases in terms of water management, but it's basically afforestation or reforestation. And there are species for everything. I mean, you know, I know there was some talk yesterday about like, oh, we can't plant under the power lines. I heard this secondhand, but you know, so you choose appropriate species for those spots, and that's if you choose the right species for the right spots, it should cut down on maintenance costs and you know, really make landscaping and maintenance easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just like we talked about yesterday, how to make the under the overpass, you know, as which might be an eyesore, how to make that, flip it around and actually make it a real benefit. You could imagine what could happen if all of a sudden we have all this really nice green area in both sides of the highway. The highway no longer is this monster wall, and instead it could actually be a really nice pedestrian space that could have, you know, bike repair facility or maybe even an outdoor amphitheater, which does not have to be paved. It could just be, you know, composed granites or some other type of stone that is pervious. And so, you know, it could actually be a center of the community too, you know, so versus what's happening there now.
I just
Yeah,
wanted.
I love it. I think you're all on the right track here.
Excellent.
I was just
Yeah,
going to
really.
say that with the stormwater facilities so close to the road, it'd be a nice educational opportunity for pedestrians walking by.
Absolutely. And hopefully, and again, having more people walking on the sidewalk and more bicyclists, and they will be able to see that. But also that means that not only is it an educational component, but then the flip of that is safety, right? Because more people walking on the sidewalk mean that area is not just a trash dump, which is now, but instead it's actually something that people are looking into.
Right.
Sir.
Yeah, all I want to say, this is Dean Balone, one of the commissioners here in Lower Allen, and Ben, I appreciate your comments. I was thinking in terms of that exactly, not just in that site, but where we would do any improvements with stormwater, use it as an opportunity. I was recently in Carlisle, and I keep forgetting the name of the park. First time I'd been there, and there was beautiful, beautiful old trees in there, and they're all different. And I was thinking, my wife and I toured through there, and they had some little narratives, you know, around the trees, and people donate them over the years, I guess, and stuff. But you know, if we're considering walkability to go along with our comp plan in the connectivity and having people walk in there, why not? And I one thing Ben said is we do often see the minimum being the fences and let's keep out kind of perspective when we go by those sites. And now we have this opportunity starting fresh. I think we're onto something to really consider that when we're looking at it, because we're killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you know, just as a point of reference, in California, they've actually done, like, they dug the dirt, and that is the retention pond. But when it's not with water, that's a soccer field or a baseball field. You know, so it'd have to be like one or the other. It could actually be multi-usage for it, depending on the topography.
But we're trying to get rid of turf grass, you know, so an active play field, we're actually retrofitting a lot of our storm basins with amended soil and wetland vegetation to make more bioretention. So turf grass, you're putting lawn chemicals on it, you're mowing it.
Yeah.
So I get it, you know, multi-purpose would be great, but we're going in a different, more ecological direction right now.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, the idea that you could make it multi-purpose, yeah.
So good morning,
Maybe
this is
if it's in a
Justin.
residential neighborhood and you need a neighborhood park, it could be a dual purpose, but other places we're pretty much going away from that.
Right.
Why do you not plant any trees in those areas? Is there a reason?
We're starting to plant trees in them, but they are, you know, species of the like wet roots.
Right. The trees, the shrubs, the ground plants, just for a variety of. We keep cutting trees down, and our air quality in the Harrisburg area is getting very poor. And it's those trees that control a lot of that.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that this would be a perfect opportunity in these wetlands to put more trees in as developers cut them down to build houses on them.
Yeah. And well, and in Pittsburgh, in the city of Pittsburgh, where I'm from, they're cutting down a lot of trees, but that's because those were invasive species, and instead they're actually planting trees that belong there. And apparently, I'm like a big proponent of pusher of using goats to actually mitigate a lot of the land. I have to like watch out with how I say that. But and in California, they're using goats to actually clean the underbrush because of fire retention and all this stuff. So you're completely right. I mean, you could go like really ecological, and it's actually, once you do it at a scale, it doesn't cost more. Actually saves you money. Was there somebody in Zoom that wanted to say anything?
Oh,
yes, please.
Yeah, Ben again. Yeah, I wanted to chime in there as well with
Hey, Ben.
the goats and the invasive issue. What I think is a shame is that a lot of the invasives that are removed are then kind of, maybe they're wood chipped or something, but there's so many of them, they can be put to use, like the Atlantis trees, which some of you may be familiar with, also called tree of heaven or tree of hell. They are like the favorite species of the spotted lanternfly. And they just proliferate very rapidly, but the wood is pretty decent and could be incorporated into park design. You know, it's kind of a almost a free source of wood. And as far as the goat thing, I think the goats are great. In part, well, it's already being done. I don't know if you're familiar with on the West Shore, this is the West Shore, but the Christian Life Assembly, they have this big area that they have goats, and the goats take care of all basically the landscaping in this one part of it. And it's pretty forward thinking. And I actually know somebody who rents out her goats to bring them to a site and have them eat stuff. They do a great job.
Yeah, they're very meticulous about doing their job correctly.
Two comments in the chat, I'll just read off.
Okay.
Michelle Partino from PennDOT, she's the District 8 planner. Her comment was, in the current conversation, logical solutions should be well thought out with regard to long-term maintenance as well. Calming measures are also opportunities where aspects of MS4 may be incorporated, developers can implement as part of a project. And then JF, I'm not sure, it's just the initials JF, commented, pardon me if I missed this, but does this mean there is a plan to put sidewalks in along the road, especially in front of Lower Island Diner? I've tried to walk along there and it's pretty dangerous as it stands now. So I think the idea, from Michelle's point, I think that we're definitely keeping an eye on the long-term maintenance. In fact, that was one of the conversations we had yesterday with Rebecca Davis, who's the stormwater program manager here at the township, that there's potentially they could use some of their stormwater fee funds to help do some maintenance activities, possibly. And of course, Michelle, I've already talked to Jeff Berkson, you know, and see if we can talk to Daryl St. Clair more about that and do some follow-up. And then to the comment about sidewalks, yeah, we're definitely looking at sort of pedestrian and bicycle improvements in addition to what we're looking at with respect to the land use improvements. So we'll be
looking at that closer here too. And Kirsten, you've already looked like you've started to draw out some of those potential alignments, sidewalks, and like I guess is the taupe or the mauve brown and the green is the potential bike trail or bike alignment, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think one of the things we'd like to start hearing about is where should those connections best be located. I think as areas like this get redeveloped in the way that we're talking about, we would definitely recommend having sidewalks along all of these streets. But we've also heard a desire for bike lanes, and we did see a bicyclist yesterday using that shoulder. I'm going to go and highlight where this was, using the shoulder in this area here. And we talked about, is there a desire, is this a good place for a better, more protected or more formal bike lane? And then if so, where would it go? So what I'm starting to show here, and I'd like to describe it briefly and then toss this one back to the group to discuss, is I'm showing a bike lane on the north side of the street.
You want to zoom into that area? So, yeah.
Sure.
Better. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm showing the bike lane here on the north side, currently where that shoulder is, and we can look at what kind of layout and separation it might want.
I think it was on the south side. That's where the 11-foot.
Is it on the south side?
Yeah, it was on the south side that there's 12 feet that you can use for 2 ways, bike lane, protected with cones or anything. And then the sidewalk is on the other side. But I mean, that's always a question is, you know, do you want to have it so that both bikes are on one side and the pedestrians are on the other side? Or do you want to have it so that you split it so one direction bike with sidewalk on the side and then the other side, the other direction bike with sidewalk on the side?
Right, and then we have the, you know, we want to think about whether this going along Simpson Ferry Road is your primary route. Is that where the bike lane should continue? Or is it a nice idea to have it come up into this new development and up towards the hotel, and then link up to, I'm going to make this just more visible, link up to more into the community and towards the school that way?
Keep in mind, bicycle route J2 is actually along the main corridor. So it runs all the way through Sharmanstown. So we just have to keep in mind what the designated bicycle route is the main corridor there. And you can have a spur off of it. I'm not saying that. I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Well, and as one that stayed at the Ramada last night, I got to tell you that being in the Ramada makes you have to drive to anywhere. You know, if you put a bike lane in front of this hotel, they're more likely to actually get on their bike. I mean, so people that are staying in the hotel that, you know, using a taxi or something to get there, they're more likely renting a bike and going to the mall rather than driving to the mall, you know, because most of the time people who have been traveling a lot, they do want to get out and walk a little bit, because otherwise, you know, there's blood clots and a bunch of other stuff.
Hi.
Today, we need to consider when we make these or suggest these changes, not only the cost of making the change, because a lot of these you may be able to do. However, once you have them, grant money runs out, and then you are stuck with maintenance costs that has to be added to the municipal budget. And so there has to be a balance of what you're putting in, the long-term cost of the maintenance.
Yeah, that takes me to Lou and Justin. I'll let you gentlemen talk here in a second, but to Lou's point, that's an excellent point, because even right now with the designated bicycle routes, PA bicycle routes, those are not PennDOT maintained routes. They do not maintain, they maintain the right of way in terms of the road surface, et cetera, but they do not maintain the designated bikeway or any improvements thereof. So to Dick's point, any improvements like that would really have to be looked at back to the municipality. That gets back to where revenue might be generated. We talked yesterday, is there an opportunity or idea to put in some type of special improvement district where you can start to generate certain fees or whatnot as development comes online? You're starting to use that as like a transportation improvement district or a business improvement district where they're paying in and you then use those funds for maintenance of stormwater, maintenance for the common areas, maintenance of bicycle paths, et cetera. Could be an idea there. So that's something to think about.
Hey, this is Lou Searles. I have a comment.
Go ahead, Lou.
Yeah, I use this corridor a lot for cycling. I know the Harrisburg Bicycle Club, which I'm a member on the board of directors, that we also have rides out of the West Shore that commute back and forth in this particular area a lot. And the old Gettysburg Road where you got the hotel is, I know that the shoulders and stuff like that are adequate now to make designated bike lanes without making very much major improvements at all. It's when you get past the Lower Allen Drive is where the concerns and stuff are, where the road is too narrow. Even to commute over to World Cup, which is actually right down the street from that, as you cross over that intersection, which I commute to there for different things, for service as well as for buying parts when they're available. The road coming in from the east to this area right here is the shoulders are adequate enough to be designated as bike lanes now to commute through there, as well as on J2, as well as going on Old Gettysburg Road where it goes by the hotel. So as far as cost is concerned, there's not really much to do other than labeling the road or labeling the surface, stuff like that, but could still be maintained basically the same as you normally do for any road service you have in the township.
I think, Dick, there, what you're saying is the old alignment of Gettysburg Road that runs by the hotel from the main drag. The shoulders are adequate, but then just across
Yes.
Lower Allen Drive where Kirsten put bike narrows.
That's correct.
There's not a sufficient shoulder as you would have on the other side of the intersection.
Yeah, had the shoulders on the other side of going west on Old Gettysburg Road, past the hotel and past the Lower Allen intersection area. If it were made wider, if the shoulders and stuff like that were made wider, it could be adequate enough for pedestrians as well as cyclists to move through that whole area to end up over at the far end. I'm trying to think of the name of the road. Bear with me a second here. I'm not sure where the Old Slate Hill Road, even going out that far and stuff like that. I'm not sure where the township line is out here. So can somebody help me with that, where the township line ends?
Okay, going west on, that was US 15, Gettysburg Road. So there is ample right-of-way width. There's tremendous right-of-way width compared to the two-lane configuration going all the way out past Allen Middle School. The township boundary is actually past the Frappuccino factory out by the hotels that are on Gettysburg Road parallel to Route 15. That's where the Upper Allen line is.
Okay, and the only other comment I have from what was said earlier, and getting on my another hat here, which I have been in construction for like 42 years, that I always felt that retention areas and stuff like that were never large enough for some of the storms that we've been getting here in the last, I'm going to say probably 10 to 15 years. And I'm really impressed with some of the comments that were made here earlier about trying to address that issue. And I know even a Good Shepherd had been told that they had to put better retention and stuff like that when they did some improvements over there at the church on Market Street, where they put underground retention and stuff like that to allow for more development in that area.
So the conversation of water retention, there are multiple ways of doing it. You could actually have water retention that starts with as simple as 4 feet. So between the sidewalk and the road, you could actually have a very nice, long, narrow 4 feet area that captures a lot of the water. And then that water is then moved over and connected to other places like these, which are much bigger. So,
okay.
Do water retention and permeability.
Justin, did you have a comment? Justin Lehman?
Yes, good morning. Just want to confirm you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to first thank you guys for doing this. I'm really excited just kind of about what you've described and just in general, the survey responses. So I live in Upper Allen Township, and for several years, I used to ride the Route Bus B cat bus through this area. And even though I still live in Upper Allen Township, but in a different area, and I no longer take that bus, I am still very familiar with driving through this area. And when I specifically look at the road from basically the movie theater through the to the township building there, that road is just forever wide to me. And I think in the very beginning, there were some drawings done, and I think it measured out from curb to curb that was like 78 feet. And I just think about what you're designing here, and I get so excited about that. But then I think about how this road, as currently constructed, just seems like it is a huge barrier for people if they want to be along that excuse me, along that road in any way. If there are any type of little pocket parks or other amenities like that for pedestrians or bicyclists, what does that look like for them to cross the street? And I don't know if there's been discussion, because I think in that general area, for the most part, it's 2 lanes both ways and then a middle universal turning lane. If there would be any thought of doing some type of road diet to maybe make one or both of those lanes one way each way, to make it more of an inviting feel and possibly slow the speeds. I know to me, it feels like it's designed more as a Route 15 extension than it is for slowly driving whatever the speed limit is, 35 probably, maybe even 40. But anyway, that specific corridor just seems like it's easy to go fast. And then I think about, as we're talking about pedestrians and bicyclists, and what that means for them. So just something to consider as well.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe this might be a good opportunity. I mean, it's already 10:30, so I don't know how we're doing with time, Troy, but maybe we should start looking a little bit more at the road itself here, the configuration, and thinking of different ways of doing it. This is the aerial that I shot earlier today. I just threw my phone up really, really high, and I got this shot. Was very lucky. But again, what you're looking at here is each one of those travel lanes being 12 feet. Including a suicide lane that in the turning lane that goes for several hundred feet, but that is going into a street that is a residential street. If we were to actually be successful at doing our visioning for what we are talking about on the outside of the highway, right? So, exactly. So that number one is that conflict area, which is the middle, and then number two is the width of the travel lanes. And if you have the travel lanes at 12 feet, if you narrow them down to 11 feet, that gives you an extra 2 feet. Not that we really need, because there's shoulder space that we can use for bicycle. But obviously, in this case, the fastest and simplest solution would be to bring all the travel lanes down to 11 feet. You leave the middle that could potentially in the future actually have, like little islands of green space, medians. But then on the left side that you see here, consider that's already 12 foot and it's already there, it's already paved. As a phase one would be to just have that as a two-way bicycle track that is protected. The 2 feet extra from narrowing the two eastbound travel lanes, those 2 feet could be used to create a buffer for the bicyclist. And that could be a number of way of doing it. And we talked yesterday very quickly about having those poles, those rubber poles that if a car hits it, that they come right back up again. Delineators. Thank you. Yes, I was going for more the technical terminology there. And so that's what Kirsten is showing us there is, how do we narrow that down, create those, build those delineators, and that already, starts to create that enclosure in a way.
When you put the lineators up, you create a nightmare for plowing. It's nightmare in that I know they're supposed to fall over and pop back up, but they only fall over couple of times and then they're broken
Yeah.
and you've got another maintenance problem.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, the truth be told is there's no simple, easy solution. I mean, one way or another, there's gonna have to be maintenance somewhere down the line. Putting some delineator or something in this case would make it safer for bicyclists, so that's the give and take. Sir.
So, I spent a lot of time on the Harrisburg Greenbelt. There's a nonprofit association that helps get grants and maintain and improve. They have areas near Wildwood Park in the north end that they actually have concrete Jersey barriers separating the bike lane, near Lewistown Road. And then going north to Gettysburg 400 has delineators and barriers because of the proximity to the traffic. But that would be a possibility for maintenance in the future. We don't have a greenbelt on the east shore, but maybe on the west shore. I mean, so that
Well,
would be an opportunity.
if you put a Jersey barrier down the edge of that, where do you put your snow?
Like I said, that's the extreme that I've observed because there's apparently a high conflict area up near the Lucknow rail yards and Wildwood Park. So they actually built a cattle chute for bikes.
Yeah.
But that's an extreme situation. I was simply saying that perhaps there could be a West Shore version of the Greenbelt, multi-municipal, developed over a decade or two that maybe the association would also help maintain and improve.
I would think that if anything, it might be better to just put and I don't know if this is available or not, but if colored macadam to delineate the bike lane by a color change.
Yeah. Oh, so you mean like paint the bicycle a different color than the road?
Painting is maintenance nightmare too.
Yeah.
But I don't know if, I know there's, like, you can put dye in concrete. I don't know if there's green macadam or gray macadam, or light gray macadam, or something that would change the color from the main travel lanes.
Yeah. So the thing about marking and striping and coloring is that visually it does make a change, but for most drivers that's not enough. And even, for example, in Pittsburgh, because of COVID, I'm part of the team that we're working at redesigning some of the streets to allow more outdoor dining area, and we have those delineators. They're using those delineators. FedEx and UPS, they drive over them. They park on the bike lane. They get off to deliver the thing just because they think it's 5 minutes, then it's okay. So even delineators sometimes don't stop cars. So painting, it's very minimal, but at the same time, it's not going to create that sense of safety that we're talking about. It's a visual.
Right, the risk to a car swerving into the bike lane or even potentially hitting a bicyclist is pretty minimal for the car, but it's, that risk is mostly borne by the bicyclist. So that's why having an actual physical separation or some kind of physical protection for the bicyclist makes that more safer and more usable space for them, which is why things like those delineators are used. But one of the other things that can be done is you can actually have a low curve. And we looked at this on another corridor recently, a low curve, where it is a physical delineator for vehicles. Will stop them from swerving so easily into the space, but it's very low, and they can even be angled to the corner, so it's not as harsh on cars that do sideswipe it. Because we all know those delineators that get broken, those people do swerve, they do sideswipe those.
Do you want to show that rendering that you did for that?
And we'll show an example of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Is there, when we're putting bike lanes along state roads, is there a set of PennDOT regulations
This is Michelle Tarquino, and just in short, to answer your question, the answer to your question is yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yes, there are specific
Yes.
design standards with regard to bike lanes, bike sharrows, delineators such as you're seeing on the screen. So there are publications and PennDOT material that are requirements to incorporate any of bicycle and pedestrian facilities into a roadway.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And in this case, for example, the illustration that you see on the screen there, we were we're thinking about, oh, just make it very cheap, buy a couple of 6x6 and stick them on the ground and stuff. And they said, no, we could also do it out of concrete and then put the delineator, so that way you have the safety from the concrete barrier, but also the delineators that cars, and with the reflective tape on it, because then cars are able to see what that edge is.
Now, a design like this, you can plow.
Yeah.
You can't plow the bike lane, but you can plow the street. But when you start talking about putting Jersey barriers up,
Yeah.
you can't plow.
Yeah, well, and I mean, in this case, for example, they would also need to plow the bike lane too, right? Because then this becomes a corridor that people are gonna be using, so then you have to make it wide enough so you could have a plower go through it.
Well, also there, excuse me,
Yes, please.
I assume there would be like cutouts periodically where plowed snow could be dumped or accumulated. I know it accumulates fast, but I also wanted to, I think what I understood the point of these workshops and sessions to be was kind of more of a visioning, like for now, putting aside the restraints and limitations to envision creatively what can be done. But to go back to the cost thing, I don't think you won't get your return on investment by installing bike lanes that don't feel safe. I think that's happened in Harrisburg. They did all this work to put in the bike lanes and they don't feel safe and people don't use them. And I've done a lot of biking myself, and that picture you just showed us with the curb, and I have been on bike lanes where it has been painted and with the delineators, and it just makes a huge difference psychologically, but I think it really does matter. The cost of not doing something is far greater, as one of the participants pointed out. It's life, it's loss of life that you're preventing. And there are creative ways to fund maintenance and to do maintenance. Maintenance can be a job creator. It's also these kind of designs that are really forward thinking, can be sources of revenue, sometimes unexpected revenue, because the place is becoming more livable, more walkable, more bikeable. People want to live here. People want to move here and pay taxes. I used to work for a company that built software for multifamily apartment owners and operators and property managers. And there were a couple things that really stood out to me, especially as somebody who's kind of ecologically minded. And one is that by far the top, quote unquote, amenity for renters was green space, above anything, above granite countertops or whatever, what have you. That was a big attractor and retainer of renters. Now, I don't know how that translates to a place in suburbia that's where we have a lot of homeowners, but I think that's generally where the trend is going. And the other, I found this really fascinating, actually. I was on this other webinar, and there was some research done on like what makes people happiest. And there was, of course, a big bump in happiness after a raise and a promotion. But what topped that was actually being able to hear birdsong. And there was, the percentage of the, however they were quantifying this in points had risen beyond the kind of, temporary boost that a raise in income might provide. So I think, cost, I think a lot of ideas get shot down prematurely because naturally and prudential, it's a prudential thing to think about costs. But I think as far as like an approach to thinking about design and implementation, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot sometimes and aren't able to see past the initial cost to, oh, well, there's all this grant money. There's all these like creative ways to fund maintenance. There's the business districts that have been discussed. Like if we just focused on the cost and kind of shied away from making big changes, we just maintain a status quo. So I think, there are ways to have bike lanes and deal with plowing. They have them all over the place in New York City. And you can imagine like plowing in New York City already isn't easy. So, there are ways to do it. So that's my 2 cents.
I'd also like to add to that. I think I'm sorry, I'm bad with names. I forget what your name was, but you made a lot of really great points on investing. And I think there's a really great YouTube channel called Not Just Bikes that basically talks about areas like the West Shore that suburbs as we know them right now really aren't profitable unless there's growing development, because the parcels are only from like a tax perspective are never gonna generate what they're worth. So we need to be thinking about the future. And, I don't wanna pretend that I'm the only, that my voice as a millennial is like everyone in the millennial generation, but one of the reasons I'm actually moving out of the township shortly is because I hate the fact that I have to use my car for everything I do. And so I'm very excited about this project from that standpoint. So yeah, I agree that we need to think creatively here.
I think also in terms of maintenance and the cost of maintenance, we have to examine what is the cost of maintenance right now. Can that be reduced by design? Because a lot of problems are design problems. We have all over the country, there's poor designs being implemented the same exact way everywhere. And it's creating a lot of extra time, money, effort, and headaches than it has to. So yeah, sure, you have these upfront costs, but what is the cost right now of maintaining things as it is, knowing that storms are gonna be more frequent and 100-year storms are gonna happen every 10 years, etc. And what does each parking space actually cost in terms of stormwater? Like looking at things that way is another, I think, useful exercise for analyzing the true cost of something. We leave a lot of things out of, the full accounting of a project, where people are paying in other forms, whether it's their health or their, the livability and walkability. Like we all pay for bad design. It's just not always quantified in financial terms.
Yeah, and of course, the other thing is that a lot of municipalities are losing people like Julie, right? Because they end up moving someplace that it has all these amenities that you want. So, if you notice what Kirsten has been working on is, we were talking a little bit about, the bike lanes and, the dimensions and all that stuff, right? But some of the stuff that we talked about yesterday was adding trees, well, she went ahead and added some trees, extending the sidewalk on one side, for example. So she went ahead and did that. And then the other thing is, a lot of the overpass actually, they are detractors in a way because they tend to be concrete. Because of the material. But at the same time, you could actually put something, well, I don't know if Panda would allow us to put anything on there, but you could actually have, columns on both ends and actually hang something from it, or do some other art pieces, like in this case, like Kirsten was showing there, like lower Allen Township, with lighting shining straight down. Right there, just making a couple of those changes, including, like someone that said, there are like grants for trees. If you get grants for the trees, the bike lane is repainting, but also, or you don't even have to paint it actually. If you put the delineators and the little curbs, you're already making a huge difference. And you can see visually, the difference that it will do. And I could almost tell you that auto shop will probably not be there for that much longer at that point, because that land becomes very valuable. It's right on the bike lane. People are able to like get on the bike lane and go shopping or go to the park and go and do so many different stuff. And that becomes redeveloped into something more like what we're talking about of mixed use developments.
I believe the future is in these town centers.
Yes.
Like Arcoma, Art Pan's building one in Susquehanna Township, where they have commercial, medical, what have you, all surrounded by residential.
Yeah.
It's all in walking distance.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing to consider with regard to all the discussion on the bike safety and all of that is, and I know the transportation folks that are joining us today probably way ahead of this, but this, it's my understanding that, in the future, we're going to be looking at the vehicles, the more common vehicles are going to have programmed into them the extra vigilance. I know a vehicle that I've recently rented. I mean, every time I get close to a white line, it just starts to notify me and shake the car. And so I think over time, pedestrians are going to feel safer just based on, over time, the vehicles that are going to be opposing them are going to be safer in general. And so I think that we'll probably see down the road, because this is the long-term plan, that in the long run, pedestrians and bicyclists are going to feel safer in general, because there'll be less incidents happening, probably collectively, because of the measures we take to mitigate any problems, but also that on the other side, the vehicles that are being produced now have some vigilance added into that.
I think that's a really good point, but I also want to counter it with another point that has been documented in the opposite direction. Our vehicles are also getting larger and larger, and there's been a trend towards vehicles, especially trucks, that have reduced visibility for pedestrians. So even if they have smart features, there is actually reduced visibility. Much larger fronts that make it harder to see people close to you and harder to see markings close to you. So we're actually seeing changes in vehicle design going in both directions.
Right, and I'm speaking more in terms of if we're looking at major construction, and that might not have to be part of the process down the road, versus some of the lighter mitigation, features that we could put into a project that might not cost as much initially, and even in maintenance down the road as well.
If you get down around Maryland, Annapolis, in that area, if you notice, all of your overpasses have a brick veneer on them, and they really look nice. I mean, they really give it a welcoming, sophisticated appearance, a welcoming appearance.
Yeah, it does.
I'd like to bring up something that we haven't talked about. I think it's very important. Just a few blocks east along this route, we talked about going all the way to Upper Allen, but just east of here, we have neighborhoods between, I know we're getting more to the middle segment, but the neighborhoods that are beyond the municipal park here, we put in sidewalk to get them connectivity to the park, because those neighborhoods don't have any recreational area. So we have going up to Warriors Flowers on this side of the street. We have a neighborhood called Linden Gardens. It has a few apartments, but it's mostly single family detached. And then on the opposite side, we have Crestwood Manor, which is between 25th Street and the old ramps at 31st Street. Okay, so those neighborhoods are isolated pockets, and I don't know that we have anybody participating from those neighborhoods, but they have a sense of difficulty getting in and out of the neighborhood. And I think that Five Lake, Jim? Oh, great. Okay, so Spring Lake, Linden Gardens on this side, and on the other side, Crestwood Manor, they don't have recreation land, but we're trying to get them connectivity to the municipal building, shopping, and the park. But I guess coming in and out of those neighborhoods, that middle lane kind of gives you a place to go to get out. Like when I make a left turn to errands after work or at lunchtime, I value that center turn lane as an escape pod to get out and get in the queue, merge. I don't know if you can share your experience with us.
Sure, my experience is kind of what you said, definitely around lunchtime and around 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. It's terrible to turn out of my neighborhood. If I'm gonna turn left, sometimes I'll just turn right and go along. Yeah, that middle lane is pretty valuable. I don't use it often because there's a lot of times people are coming into it, but it's kind of we mentioned Royal Flowers. The sidewalk kind of stops there on the one side. I'd like to see that.
Yeah. And, you know, the median, it's obviously, it's incredibly useful because you do need people to be able to cross the road, right? The problem is when it's continuous like it is right now, because then the whole thing becomes no man's land. And, you know, I always, like one time I was driving and there was like, sun was hitting me right on my face. I couldn't see the road. I couldn't even see what's in front of me because the sun was shining in front of me. So I wonder, like, there are a lot of people who also have other disability issues. Can they really see any kind of paving, any kind of marking, you know? And the answer to that is obviously no, because you do get a lot of accidents and things, you know? So sometimes markings are not enough. So that's where I always think like the median, you know, try to figure out where it needs to cross, where cars have to cross, and then the rest of it, try to figure out a way that tightens up the width of the whole entire road, i.e. making a small little island every so often that slows it down, you know, where there are no needs for that crossing. And it may not necessarily happen everywhere. It may happen sporadically. Sometimes it's best if it actually is a longer one and actually have people either make a U-turn or come back and stuff, because that's actually safer than having like what we have now, which is like continuous suicide lane. Yes.
I mentioned yesterday afternoon about the potential to put a roundabout there at Gettysburg and Simpson Ferry. And this safety discussion about getting out of the development could benefit from that as well. So you could make a right out, come down to the intersection and get in the roundabout and go back.
Okay.
And again, instead of having all the cuts
right
in
yeah.
the boulevard.
And okay, so can we, Kirsten, do you want to go back to one of those intersections that we're talking about?
Well, Jamie's talking about the one right back down here.
Yeah, we talk about, again, entering that village center to create that sense of you've arrived and you need to slow down, to put a roundabout at that point. Again, that would create the opportunity again for some traffic calming coming into the village center, but it would also provide some safety for those coming out of the development on the north side, come down and get in the roundabout and go back eastbound.
Yeah, I think Jamie's idea is that if just south of this picture where we had all the development being drawn, that becomes like the town center where all that reinvestment in the taller buildings, the density, kind of like then you need some type of, you've arrived in some place where, because otherwise, you know, there's no other than a light here. Is there a light? There is a light here, right, John? Yeah, that's a signalized intersection going into Linda Lane on the left. And that's how you, also coming from this direction, how you would make the left to go by the hotel at the old Wonton site. So, I mean, what are the thoughts about some type of roadway design that would incorporate a roundabout? Only dollars away from a solution. What's that? You're only dollars away from a solution. And you think that's a good solution? I'm not a traffic engineer.
The problem with roundabouts in Pennsylvania is they make them too small.
I think PennDOT
and it scares the bejesus out of some people. My wife would drive 30 miles to avoid a roundabout in Pennsylvania. Yet she has no trouble in New Jersey.
Yeah, Michelle can talk to them, but New Jersey, they're actually eliminating, they had traffic circles and they're eliminating their traffic circles because of safety issues. So
right.
Pennsylvania, a more updated design of roundabout, again, smaller, more controlled in the traffic pattern. So, and this would be most beneficial, I think, of it, which since Barry were able to get out into 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction. But you can do 4-lane roundabout.
If you go out to, okay, Ross Moyne Road yeah, if you go out to the one at Ross Moyne Road, Lisburn Road,
yeah,
you'll see there's more tire marks across the concrete than there is on the macadam.
That's designed for trucks to be able to get through those intersections as well.
That makes them cheaper to build because you build that concrete island. It's intentional that there's tire marks in there because if you build them to the scale of tractor trailers, it would cost a lot more and be a lot larger. So you can, that's intentional, but they're designed for the trucks to do that. Yeah. And those 2 work exceptionally well. And I go through them all the time, except for the driver who stops at the yield sign because they've never driven one before.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah. So what Kirsten is just showing here, if I could just talk a little bit about this design, and it's exactly what you mentioned. You know, the roundabouts, the way they function incredibly well is when they are down to 1 lane. Because if you have 2 lanes coming into a roundabout in each direction, 2 lanes, then you always have 1 lane that it has to stop, the other one goes, and then it's a conflict there. So a 1-lane roundabout works really well because it does keep the flow going. The problem is a lot of people in the United States are still not used to the roundabout, and so that's where you have all the issues of people not knowing, like they stop or they don't stop and what happens. But what Kirsten is showing here is what ends up happening if you neck it down to 1 lane in each direction, coming in from all 4 sides, and then having a roundabout that is actually appropriately sized. I'm just going to until you come and see, but you see, this here is a truck. This is an 18-wheeler truck. That 18-wheeler truck, you could see how we could actually function and go around the roundabout without a problem. And if in case, you know, the driver's having a bad day, you could actually have a mountable curve in the middle, you know, that allows the truck to actually go on top of that. But visually, and it's actually mountable, but it's slightly raised, you know, so it is a curve and people are able to see it. But cars then are able to make this turn and they actually have to slow down quite drastically because they know they're entering into a place that they almost have to stop and think, you know. But what that does do is that it removes the light, which is great based on power outage. You don't have to worry about that. But also it allows the continuous flow of the cars going around in the roundabout.
And you'll notice this also has removed several additional lanes going into the intersection at several sides, because with the roundabout, you don't need a right turn lane, a through lane, and a left lane. The roundabout handles that within it. So this intersection, I'm going to flip that off for a sec. You see that there is a right turn lane, a center through lane, and then a left turn lane, all just at that lower end. Highlight that. Right here, just one end, one leg of the intersection, you've got 3 different lanes.
Well, there's 5 lanes on that side for it.
What, I mean, just from one direction,
one
right?
direction,
Just for one leg of the intersection, one direction only, we're already having 3 different lanes. And with the roundabout, that goes down to 1 because all of those turning movements are accommodated through the roundabout.
This is
And
Justin.
of course, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is Justin. I just wanted to chime in again on this. I think to what the one gentleman was saying, I think there's a huge educational component to roundabouts in Pennsylvania. They are still, you know, somewhat new, but I think our general South Central Pennsylvania area has started to see them come up. So I think we are getting more used to how to navigate them. I think they do an amazing job at slowing traffic. So I think that would be a fantastic option to slow the movement of vehicles through that particular area. So I really like that idea. And I also just wanted to quickly comment on an area just beyond this. It was discussed right before the roundabout, and it was the refuge islands, as the roadway is so wide right now, but specifically around like the Bonefish Grill area. I think about when I rode the bus, there was a gentleman, we would coming out from Harrisburg in the afternoon, who worked at Bonefish. So he would get off the bus across the street and then have to cross that entire, again, whatever that was, 80 feet of pavement and basically try and Frogger the entire way across the street just to get to his work in the afternoon. So I just think about accommodations that would make it easier for an individual to not worry about trying to cross 80 feet of pavement, but maybe 35 or 40. And then there was a coworker of mine that lived in the development. We had talked about this with the developments, but behind the Spice Bazaar, so just a couple blocks away from here. And again, he rode the bus, and so he would get off on the opposite side of the Spice Bazaar and then have to cross that street at 4:30 in the afternoon. So again, I just think about how the road is currently designed, and is it designed in a way that makes it safe for a person to cross, and is it convenient then for him to walk a half mile up to the red light by the battery warehouse store, cross, and then walk back to his house. So again, just other thoughts when it comes to other modes of transportation besides our focus of just how to quickly get the car from point A to point B, when I think just making sure that we're continually focusing, and I think we are doing a good job of the other modes like walking and biking or using transit.
I had another comment in this area. If when you're done doing this, if you could zoom out to where like the hotel drawing was. That like area in the middle where you kind of have a bike path in the brownish, like I think that area could be a good opportunity for like a raised pedestrian crosswalk to kind of connect the two sides of near the mall.
Yeah.
Like in the
That's
middle,
correct.
right? Like
there where she's showing it?
no, like literally, like, well, I guess that would be a good opportunity too, but I'm talking more about like the road that goes through there.
Yeah, right in front of the hotel?
On Gettysburg?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's definitely another interesting thing. Kirsten, do you want to, should we just go real quickly to one of these roads that we could look at the median and talk a little bit about that raised crosswalks?
Yeah. Do we want to look at this intersection that we were just talking about, or do we want to
Let's
look at the middle of this block?
Yeah,
here?
let's look at the middle of this block real
By the
quickly.
hotel?
Yeah.
Let me get a good image of that.
So while Kirsten's getting an image of this road, the one thing about the roundabouts, which I do like, is that because of the fact that cars are always making a right turn, and then cars coming into the road are making a right turn in, there's a little triangle piece that could become like an island of refuge in a way, as in pedestrian cross one traffic lane, that they know that cars are coming from the left, and then they have a little area that they could stop and then look to the right, and they know that the cars are coming from the opposite direction, and then they cross the other one. So it allows people that, I was also with a little e-scooter, a year ago or so, and for me, that was like, oh my God, this is really fantastic. That's why I really love those things. The one thing I don't like about roundabout is that, in this case, for example, would be a major upgrade because it's bringing this humongous intersection down to something more manageable. But roundabouts, normally in areas that is a lot more of a tighter urbanism, what they do is rather than having pedestrians actually crossing a very short distance, means that they have to come and they have to go around the roundabout in order to cross, and around the roundabout in order to continue walking the same direction they were heading before. So depending on where they go, they could be great, or they could actually start hindering. So it's not a solution for all intersections.
You're taking 5 lanes and bringing them down to 2 lanes.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're creating a merge point somewhere. And when you create a merge point, you create accidents.
I think the whole idea too is to determine if we can actually create efficiencies in the roadway as well. There, Dick, so maybe where we're finding all that potential excess capacity in that 4 lanes plus the
middle turn lane is, I think, what we're also trying to evaluate with our engineers too. So, a lot of these ideas, these are good ideas, but doesn't mean that it's a final solution, if you will, in terms of we have to actually go back and do some analysis with our traffic engineers to make sure, hey, will that work? And sometimes it doesn't work because engineer wise, it just will not work. And then, so a lot of what we're trying to get today and what the ideas are, and that's what Peter and Kirsten are sketching. And then we'll do some more analysis on it to determine what potentially is constructible, feasible from that perspective.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point to remember. We are collecting a lot of ideas today, and we're happy to hear everyone's ideas, and then see which things we like or not. But a lot of these will impact others. So if we do a roundabout, for example, we do have to look at what that means for the blocks surrounding it and how that impacts those additional lanes as well. So these are all things definitely to consider, but we still want to keep. We want to hear all your ideas today, and then we'll sort through and see how they can fit together based on what it is that we're hearing from you.
So we're going to look at a mid-block crossing. I think it was Michelle that said it. That was taught us.
I think that was Julie.
Oh, Julie. Yeah, we're going to look at a mid-block crossing because the mid-block crossing, there's some different ways that you can do it, and there's one specific one that we have seen that all studies have shown that it's very, very safe. Okay, and I think Kirsten will be drawing that soon. We just love drawing buildings.
Well, we
as
talked about
architects do.
buildings closer to the street here, and so we just wanted to put the context in.
Yeah. But imagine, for example, again, somebody staying at the hotel, be able to walk out of their hotel across the street because there's some really cool restaurant across the street, and so make it very safe for them to cross. So the idea there is not only that you raise the curve, that you raise the road exactly where the pedestrians are crossing, but what happens in that little island in the middle is also key to make it work really, really well. And what it is that when you're crossing one direction, you stop. Once you get into that little island in the middle, you stop and then you make a right turn, and then you're facing the traffic that's coming your direction. And then you make a left turn, and then you cross the next lane. So that's what she's going to show us right now on this on the illustration.
We want 2 raised crossings and an island.
Just time-wise, we have about 15 minutes left in the session. Okay.
Hey, this is Lou. I'd like to make comments about the roundabouts.
Please.
If you could down to take 2 examples, Linglestown, which has already been in existence now for a couple of years, has grown great praise of the residents down there and how well that thing works in calming traffic and stuff like that for getting in Linglestown. Down in Hershey, there was an experiment that I was involved with involving on 322. They have 2 roundabouts down there right now. And one of the concerns that we had as cyclists were people that do cycle a lot down that area on the East Shore about getting bicycles and stuff around there. And those particular circles down there have worked out really well as far as calming traffic and allowing cyclists to get around the whole entire intersection and stuff like that safely. And so you may want to take a look at, maybe take a little drive down to some where they've done those designs and been very successful at putting those roundabouts in. Now, the one drawing you had up there that where the intersection came down where the bike lanes were on one side of the road. What they do in a lot of places that I've been to, including Pittsburgh and also in Europe, where they use the roundabouts and stuff like that to create a lane around there to get cyclists and stuff like that through, and they use the crossing areas for pedestrians as well as using that for bicycles too to get around through that intersection. And that's worked very well every place I've ever been.
Lou, is that the roundabouts out by 322? Is that right there by the Milton Hershey School?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it's on 322 as you go eastbound. There's 2 of them in there right now and I was involved when the first one that they got as far as riding down there at least once a week and try to, and submitting a report and an opinion about how well it worked and everything, because of the advocates we're trying to get a safer way to get cyclists across the street, as well as going the same flow as 322. And right now it's worked out well.
Yeah, the one even has the Spartan statue right in the middle of it, right?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They really work really great as a gateway for the most part, and also slowing down traffic. So what Kirsten will show you here is what I was talking about, the crosswalk, mid-block crosswalks. If you notice, for example, if I'm at the hotel and I'm coming out of the hotel, I look left, right, and I see the cars are coming from that direction, and then I cross, but then I don't go continuous. I don't just go straight shot. Even bicyclists, they don't go straight shot. Instead, they have to stop, get off, and then make a right turn and a left turn. But as you're making a right turn, in this case, looking up at the image, you're looking at the cars that are coming the opposite direction. So this way, you're forcing the pedestrians and you're forcing the pedestrians to really look at the direction that the cars are coming. You're forcing the bicyclists at the getting off the bike, walk it, but also look at the traffic. And there's also about, there's something to be said for people who are walking and you're looking at the driver and you're looking into their eyes, they're like, oh my God, it's a human being, it's not a car, So this actually creates that relationship that the pedestrians are looking at the eyes of the driver. So, but also at the same time, this creates a little island of refuge. People are able to stop there, take a breather, and continue walking. And you're tightening up also that big intersection that normally you have that make it unwalkable. So this is a really fantastic, really great way of doing the mid-block crossings versus just racing the whole entire road to connect the two pieces and having the cars go up and back down again. In this case, you are making multiple levels. You're making that connection. Julie, is this what you were asking about?
That's not exactly what I had in mind, but I think that that's good. Essentially, I just thought that it would be a good idea to have a connection between the two big shopping centers. So yeah, that works.
Yeah. This way, this type, for example, and you see how Kirsten is doing this little green area, green island. You could actually have those become like a garden, and you could actually rent. You could have somebody to sponsor the manicuring of that garden. Like the hotel could manicure those two spaces. For them, it's a great big deal because that means that their pedestrian, their users are going to come. That's going to be their main door into the hotel. So that's sometimes how you could finance some of these things. And like in Western Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, we have, what is it? The Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, that they do that in the highways. People pay to maintain the highways beautiful and all this stuff, and they actually do a lot of landscaping. So
that right here at the Squirrel Hill Tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. Right around the Squirrel Hill tunnels, and you see really fantastic, beautiful flowers and stuff. Well, somebody's paying for that, but they also put their names on it, and you can do that with small little places like this. So Troy, how are we doing with time?
We have about it's 11:22.
Okay, so we have 8 minutes. In general, anything else that we have missed that we?
I think we just need to, if you zoom back out, I know we spent a lot of time, I think, Jamie brought up the point about the AMC Theater, kind of completing that intersection.
Oh, yes.
Where the Wendy's is, so it's something we don't want to forget about. And I know yesterday, probably the next session that begins here at 1 o'clock. We're taking a little break. So we'll do more drawing during that time, of course, but is to move down the corridor. I know yesterday we talked about in front of Royers, the flower shop, kind of a mixed use type of opportunity through there. So we want to make sure we're not, there's a lot of great ideas, making sure we're getting down to the corridor by the end of the day. So we have a full kind of look at the program and ideas for tonight's output presentation.
This is the intersection with the AMC.
Right. So I think, Jamie's ideas are drawn here, but think about how it could be, buildings could be on the three corners, I guess, and assuming Wendy's might stay there.
Until it goes,
But you really could create a complete 100% corner for all three of those. The mixed use, I think Jamie's idea is some mixed use there.
Yeah.
Because you do have a great elevation, so.
Yeah, and The nice thing about graded elevations is that, so from the back, from the movie theater, like where Kirsten have AMC, I think it's like a good 5 or 10 feet, right? The elevation, 5, 10 feet. That actually means that if you dig a little bit more, you could have enough space to have underground garage. So cars could go under the building there, but then the first level of the building is actually facing the street at the level of the street. So that's a fantastic way to, be able to have shops and all that. Have a really nice sidewalk along the street or bike lanes also connected into that. But that's where you start playing with the topography and hiding the use of the car. Cars are pretty, but not that pretty that you want to into your built environment that well. So that is where you can start making a little bit of change. And also, like we said before, that perception issue, buildings being closer to the street means cars no longer feel like it's this open space and it goes super fast. Having taller buildings at that intersection is going to tighten it up quite drastically. My only question is, and they're like, what, 5 lanes coming this direction, right? Is that warranted? Is there like a traffic need for 5 lanes?
So I think that's still part of an evaluation needs to be done since the old interchange was removed, and depending on where the traffic is flowing from, coming north on Lower Allen Drive, are they coming north and then having to turn right? So is there a need for, that right turn lane? And then all of the left turn lanes, there's several. I mean, I use that pretty regularly as well. I just think need to look at the trip data to see what the requirements are or what the need is for all those lanes.
I guess the question becomes, if we start to put more development here, then we might, today we don't think we need that many travel lanes, but in the future it might warrant, to have more capacity for the trips generation.
Yeah, and that's always a question, isn't it? If you already have it built, is that a built capacity that you could utilize later on in the future? But then at the same time, now that that extra capacity that you have means longer crossing because you're crossing on a 5 travel lane road at the moment. And a lot of times you could keep a lot of that built capacity by actually having bulb outs at the intersections, and then letting the lanes actually become parallel parking lanes, So the pavement is still there. All you're doing is just you're enclosing it at the intersection, which is where pedestrians are crossing. You want to draw that, Kirsten, just for fun? So just do a bulb out here and here.
On this side?
On both sides, yeah, so that it tightens it up. So, for example, right now we also have a huge, as you can see, we also have a huge shoulder on the south side. Can you zoom into that area, Kirsten, so we can see better? There we go. You see that there's a huge shoulder on that side, but if you do a bulb out there and you do a bulb out on the other side, instead of having a right turn lane, that infrastructure that you already have built there, you could keep it as on-street parking, right? And if you need it later on, you could remove the bulb out and then you have the lane back on. But you could have the bulb out, but at the same time, you are reducing the crossing time for pedestrians to cross there. So that's one way that you could deal with that without removing the whole piece.
Hi, I just wanted to,
Yes,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I know we're about to close up here. I don't think I'll be able to attend the rest of the day. So I just wanted to bring up something more in general with the importance of character and identity of the place. I think it's a tragedy that across America, there's kind of there's placeless places, if that makes sense. Small businesses that gave places character have been, crushed by Walmart or whoever. And, not that Walmart doesn't bring jobs, but it kind of creates a blandness, and a place that's unique and that has character becomes a destination. So I recently was involved in a practice called the story of place. And this is the Harrisburg area. But that process was about, I did try researching and identifying what the overarching patterns have arisen in Harrisburg throughout history that kind of presents a certain identity. What like worked when Harrisburg has worked well, when this area has worked well, why has it worked well? With the end goal being producing kind of some criteria or some principles to guide project development and management, and kind of use as an evaluation for how successful a project will be. The idea being that a project will only be successful if it aligns with the character and patterns that recur in a place, the relationships that are built in a place. So I think it's seriously worth taking a look at the history of this area. I mean, I feel ashamed because I don't know much about this area that I've lived most of my life in, how it developed. And with Story of Place Harrisburg, we went way back. We went like geologically speaking, which I think actually had some value to determining what those patterns and principles are, because the river is such a centerpiece to the city of Harrisburg and this area. So how it formed, how it brings enriching nutrients, and why this area became such a fertile place for agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. And that can help you create an image of what the area is, what it has been. And you know, there was a gentleman who mentioned like the brick facades on, I think I'm not sure if it was the overpasses or bridges or what. And like, yeah, it looks a little bit, you know, more upscale. But is it really aligned? And maybe it is. Is it aligned with is it consonant with the character and aesthetic of Lower Allen Township? So when we say the identity or character of Lower Allen Township, I'm not sure I know what that means, and I'm not sure we are all on the same page as to what that might look like, and how to design to that, and how to choose materials and species to align with that. So I don't know if there's like is there a historical society in Lower Allen? Is there a natural history compendium of some kind? Doing kind of a literature review or asking people who know a lot about this kind of thing in this area, I think can yield probably some guidance on how to approach these projects. So
yeah,
just
is this Ben?
Yes, this is Ben.
Yeah. Hey Ben, so there's a really great book here at the municipal building, the history of the place of this area, right?
It's only $10.
It's only $10. I'm just selling, just letting everybody know. No, but you're completely correct. And because here's the thing, let's be honest. If you drop anybody in that intersection, you say, where are you? They're going to be like, I don't know. Are you? Oh, yes, yes, absolutely. I can see that. Oh, yeah, that's true. That's the only reason why you would know that you are in Camp Hill. Are you in Camp Hill? No, you're not actually, right? Not what that is.
No, you're in Hampton Township on one side and Lower Allen Township.
There you go. Yeah, but the built environment, what language is it saying? It's saying that you're like in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's in the middle of anywhere, actually, anywhere, not nowhere, anywhere, because there's so many intersections with the same conditions throughout the whole entire United States. You know, and so yes, there's an essence of the place that you have to also revive. I mean, yesterday we talked about some of the houses that are here on the east side of the corridor. You know, the really beautiful duplex and stuff. You know, there's an essence of the place that historically was there, and so how do you bring a lot of that into, you know, the 21st century, you know, and into the new way of thinking? And obviously for us, it's like introducing more bike lanes, introducing more BMP, introducing more pedestrian areas and amenities and stuff. You know, so those are some of the things that we're looking at and talking about. But then there's also the whole schema of the architecture, and you know, what is that for a place like here? Right, Troy?
Yeah, we're just 3 minutes past the deadline, so
yeah,
that would wrap up the first workshop.
Here,
sir.
one building there probably can't be built.
Which one is that?
be the, was the Chinese restaurant.
Top right,
Left,
top left.
the brownish roof.
Yeah.
You're talking about this building?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
The, the roadway is about level with the roof line.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly what we're saying. That's great because that you access the back of that building from the back, so you access it at 11 foot, 10 feet under what the grade level of the street is. That means that you could actually put parking under the building, and then at grade level is the first floor of the building. So that is how you play around. I mean, that's what topography is fantastic. It lets you do a lot of really cool things like that.
You'd have to go retaining wall.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, those are part of at that point, those retaining walls become part of the actual structure of the building, the foundation. But they have to dig them in, so they become part of the retaining wall area. And so, yeah. And the developer pays, of course, yes.
I also want to just be clear that in some of these things, we're not only talking about now, we're also talking about in the future. We're talking about potential changes to things like zoning or setbacks that might allow things to change over time in the way that you want, right? So in this particular case, there's an existing building, and we're not saying that something would happen to that existing building, but we are showing how over time, if the setback or zoning were to be changed to accommodate the kind of vision that you want, then a building could be put closer to the street. Not saying that would happen now.
Yeah.
That building obviously is there.
And of course, for example, imagine if we are successful and create this type of density along this corridor, that Chinese restaurant, right? That's what it is now?
It's close.
Oh, it's close. Okay, well, whatever restaurant that was there would love to be here rather than where they are now. I mean, would love to be at this kind of density because they know for a fact that they will be turning, fried fish like there's no tomorrow. So that, I think they call that the donut effect. It's like a donut shop where there's a lot of people, the donuts are always fresh. Donut shop that there are few people, good luck. So anyway, anything else before we break? I'm sorry that we are 5 minutes late, but this is good stuff.
We can I just want to make sure, if you just give a quick kind of 30-second overview of what we talked about.
And I'm going to share my screen to show the schedule for this afternoon.
Okay.
You can just do that, Kirsten. That way you can just.
This is Lou. I'd like to make a comment before you leave this thing. I have to prepare for a Zoom call at 1 o'clock and I have to leave right now. But I'd like to make a comment since I can't be involved in the eastern portion of the discussion this afternoon. But consider maybe using some of those streets and stuff like that that are 4-lane to have bike share lanes, and maybe down there past the township, going toward Flinchies and stuff like that, widening the shoulders and stuff like that for use of access for bicycling and also pedestrian walking areas. And that's the only thing I have a comment. That's comments I was going to make when I got into the eastern section, but I've got this Zoom call this afternoon I have to do. So, and thank you for
so
allowing
much.
me to participate.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for participating,
Yes.
Lou. Great.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks
we have a
everyone.
lot.
I gotta head out too.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, those who have to leave, please do feel free to jump off. We are past our time. As Troy has just asked that we do a quick recap for anyone who did come in late and is able to stay a few more minutes. We'll show a few of the things that we talked about today. We talked about quite a lot, so we think we have some internal cleanup and putting these pieces together to do. But the one that's on the screen here, this was the last item we talked about, the intersection with Lower Allen Township Road and Simpson Ferry Road. And we looked at some improvements. We looked at the potentially narrowing Lower Allen Township Road at the corner, which is a technique that we can look at elsewhere along the corridor and into the corridor as well, including those curb bump outs to allow the flow of traffic, but also narrow the intersection where there's available space, and just make a more directed intersection and easier crossing points for pedestrians, while keeping your the existing pavement further up the street and using that for things like parking. We also looked at, you can see that bright green line, the continuation of a bike path along the corridor. We looked at ways that the development parcels around and through this site might change over time. Let me put on another layer here. We looked at the mid-block crossing in front of the hotel, which also is a technique that we'll want to look at, not just here, but elsewhere along the corridor. There might be other locations that we want to incorporate, not just crossings at intersections, but mid-block crossings, and there are safe ways to do that. So we'll want to continue looking at where places for those kinds of crossing would be. Here's an overall look at throughout this whole multi-block area here, some of the bigger ideas that were talked about. We did lay in a number of building footprints, very conceptually, but showing how these parcels might develop over time, in some ways that are already planned, such as that hotel, and in some ways that may come in the future. What could this look like if buildings were to be brought closer to the street, and then where are the street connections that we'd like to have throughout that site. So we showed, for example, in the center here, making sure that there's a strong connection between Gettysburg Road and Simpson Ferry Road. We also talked about closer to the overpass, bringing buildings up closer to that space, maybe simplifying the intersection and removing that side leg so that that whole area is more direct and more simplified and has fewer conflict points. And by removing that right turn separated leg, you can have additional green space that can be integrated into pedestrian space. We talked about on both sides of the overpass using the green areas that are PennDOT owned as stormwater retention areas, but incorporating into that landscaping and riparian buffers and ecological park and native planting kinds of designs. A lot of opportunities to think about how that might be done, but that would make a really great front door and more usable, enjoyable park space and pedestrian space along the street for pedestrians, and some educational opportunities to really make Lower Allen Township set a name for itself as a place that's pursuing best ecological practices, as well as using a lot of that space to just perform the function of stormwater management. We showed, again, in that area, bringing some buildings closer to the street, tighter to the street, so that you have a town center character, and you're encouraging people to slow down and to enter the town and to visit these businesses by having things that are closer to the street and more visible, and there's a clear sense of place there. We talked about using that overpass as an opportunity to incorporate more lighting and some signage and wayfinding and create some identity for the township. We talked about quite a lot of things, so if I'm missing anything big, please jump in, but this is the quick recap of some of the big ideas. And I think the one more item that I'll share, again, for anyone who did miss it, who jumped in late, is that street view of what that would mean at a more human scale. You can see the bi-directional bike path. We talked about various different ways of separating that from the street. Not all of which are shown here, but we did talk about reducing the lane width to an 11-foot lane, which is just a slight reduction to a very standard 11-foot. We talked about throughout the corridor, we'll want to continue considering where the central median needs to be a turn lane and where it could potentially be just a non-continuous turn lane and treat it as a painted area or median or some other kind of, we didn't really talk about the treatment there, but we did talk about rather than a long continuous turn lane, limiting the turn lane function to only where it's needed, and that gains you that central lane to do other things with. And then over on the left, you see that riparian stormwater management and riparian zone in the PennDOT owned right away.
Thanks, Kirsten. And just real quick then for this afternoon, I'll share my screen here with the schedule. So at 1 o'clock, we'll start up with the next design session. That'll go to 2:30, and then we'll quickly go into at 2:45 the third design session. And then tonight at 6 o'clock, there'll be a Zoom presentation only. It won't be in person, but it will be Zoom.
So if you're home and grab some dinner or afterwards, you can join in at 6 o'clock. We'll kind of share all of the discussion that we talked about over yesterday afternoon and through today. Okay? Thanks, everybody. We'll be back at 1 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank you all for staying with us for an extra 15 minutes too. Thank you long this morning. I had some deadlines I had to come off.